And we are live with the Naked Parent Podcast. My name's Chad Ratliffe. I'm your host, and I'm so grateful to have Breanne Whitty here with us today. Hi, Breanne.
Hi, how's it going? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're super grateful that you share your story with us and your journey, which helps all of us, become better parents and create more hope and more experience and more all that stuff that we want to have in our lives. So let me start by telling Naked Parent Nation a little bit about you. You are a mother of three. You work from home. Your two oldest are autistic and your youngest is neurotypical. Your oldest is trans and your middle son has Chiari malformation and tethered cord. You are neurodiverse and two have Chiari malformation and EDS.
Yes.
Your partner runs a nonprofit for foster kids, which is so cool.
Yeah.
And welcome. And maybe tell us, explain some of those things that I didn't explain so well.
All of the words. Yeah.
Yes.
So, hi everybody. How's it going? So yes, my older two are autistic. My oldest is trans. And it's so funny in the more I learn about like autism stuff, the more common I see for autistic people to be more gender fluid. And that's exactly the story of my oldest. And on top of that, they also have a lot of other underlying mental health issues. And the older they get, the more profound that gets on top of the autism and everything else. My middle son also is autistic. And he has Chiari malformation, as so do I. It's they're just finally finding the genetic link, but essentially the cerebellum tonsils are our brains falling out of the back of our head. It's a malformation of the skull, which leads to the cerebellum tonsils, which is the little loop-de-loop part of your brain is herniated. It's falling out. And so it presses on the brainstem. It can cause a wide variety of symptoms. And he also has tethered cord. So it's another anomaly that kind of happens all at the same time. He had surgery for his tethered cord when he was 5. I had brain surgery for my Chiari when I was 36. He has not gone under that surgery yet. But it very much, it really limits his activity level, increases his pain level, his cognitive functions, his dexterity, his flexibility. It affects a whole lot of stuff on top of, just navigating the neurotypical world with an atypical mind. And my youngest is 7. And as far as we know, he's the only neurotypical person in our house. He's the odd man out. We have a very colorful home. And it's just been recently, he's 7 and my middle son is 10, and they are the best of friends. Cool. And it's always been super cool to watch this neurotypical kid literally grow up in an autistic world, like his brother like let him into these imagination things. I had to get him into speech therapy because he learned how to talk from his older brother with his funny cadences and stuff like that. And it's just been in the past year or so that I've really had to focus on making sure that he is living as a fulfilled life as he can, because we are very routine in our house, like going out and spontaneously doing things doesn't happen because it's very much been catered around, preventing overstimulation and burnout and my other children's like mental health and just the smoothness of our house. So it's very routine. And in the past 6 or 7 months, I'm really seeing his need to not be super routine and to be around maybe more neurotypical people. And on the flip side, I feel like this kid is growing up with such an amazing view of autism. Like he knows that his older siblings are autistic. He has a really great understanding, but he also knows it as normal too, which is really cool.
That is so cool. That's kind of like what we're trying to do with the whole world out there, is something that he's doing naturally and from a very clean slate. That's so cool.
Right. Yeah, it is cool. And it is challenging too. My middle son is probably my easiest child. I hate that term about some
Yeah.
children being hard and some children I mean, kids are kids, and we all, everybody is different. But I used to say if I could have had 20 of him, I would have just kept going, because he's just this amazing, calm, peaceful, happy little dude. And my oldest, if we're talking spectrum, is my hellfire, and has been since the day they were born. And when they are triggered, when they have their outbursts, it's very violent. It's very verbally abusive. It's very scary. And it always has been, even when they were 5, when they were 9, threatening to hurt themselves and threatening to hurt us. Like it has made it's hard. And so having my other 2 boys bear witness to this, and not wanting to use the fact that they're like autistic and they're overstimulated, or all of these things, as an excuse for violent, scary behavior, but also trying to explain that has been really, really tricky. And trying to make sure that my younger kids don't mimic that behavior. Like, that's not what we do when we're angry, and it's not what we do when we're overstimulated, has been pretty challenging. But all in all, we are managing. And I feel like something I constantly have to remind myself is every single child is different, regardless of their neurodiversity, regardless of their physical limitations or their disability. Like, every kid is different. And I feel like you can't parent all of your children the same way. My oldest is going to have limitations and expectations that look way different than my youngest, and, I feel like as parents going in, when we're pregnant stuff, we always have this image in our head. And this can be something that's really hard to let go of, how it's going to be, right?
Mhm.
How it's going to be when the kids are born. And in your head, you don't generally think of, having a child that is sick, or having a child with disabilities, or having a child who's autistic, or who operates, we really just kind of grow up with this like very fluffy image. And the second we have that baby, that image gets popped. And when I was working with birthing mothers and parents, I always tried to talk about this. When you're talking about preparing for parenthood, you read all these books and you buy all the things and you think you got it. And then you bring that baby home and you realize it's crazy, it's crazy. It can be overwhelming. And a lot of people, they like will mourn this idea of what they thought parenthood would like, or they will mourn, I use that word very lightly, but they're just like, it wasn't what I expected. This is super hard. And but parenthood is hard, and a lot of time we spend not knowing what we're doing and just navigating and figuring out and finding hacks. And I think that's why this podcast is so important, is listening to other people's hacks or perspectives can sometimes really open up like freedom and happiness, and sometimes acceptance. I've met parents that sometimes just had to accept that this is your child and it's awesome. And yeah, it's going to be hard, but I know some neurotypical kids that are really hard too. Right. And, just like focusing on that acceptance. And, because my oldest was, once again, I'm going to say my most challenging child, right off the bat, I like earned my coat of arms, parenting this kid. And so when my boys came along, I was just like, every child is so different. And, my youngest being neurotypical and just being like born into this world that is so, I like to say colorful. I don't like to say like neurodiverse or chaotic or something. We just have a really colorful house. It just, I guess it just is what it is. But as far as it being difficult, I learned very early on that, I was just like, oh, the baby's going to sleep in the crib. No, baby slept with me, like all these things that you really think. And, parenting every child individually based on their needs and not necessarily my expectations, and giving them the freedom to thrive. Like my middle son, I like looking back, I always knew that he was autistic. He spoke in his own language, and I knew what he was saying, but nobody else. And that was until he was like 4 or 5. And it wasn't until we moved to Colorado that people are like, have you gotten him in? And I wasn't urgent about going him in and getting a diagnosis, because he was happy and he was thriving in his own way, in his own time. It wasn't him who had problems. It wasn't our house who was worried. It was when I would bring him to relatives and they're like, something's wrong,
Right.
you know? And so we didn't rush into a diagnosis for him, because it wasn't that kind of situation. He got diagnosed when he was in the 1st grade, and everything made sense. I'm like, yeah, we kind of already knew that, you know, but he's like happy and he's doing awesome. And, you know, in school, we have occupational therapy and speech therapy, which has really, really helped. He's had problems in school with just getting overly frustrated and escaping to his own little world and missing the thing and being able to sit still and trying new things. He's a perfectionist. If he doesn't think he can do it right, he doesn't want to try it at all. And socially, obviously, you know, problems like that. But it was my oldest that I had him in for a psych eval at 5, because I knew that something was different. And that psych eval was inconclusive. And so we just kind of went along parenting the best we could, which honestly felt very frantic and scary with my oldest.
And how's that going now? Same?
So the past 3 years have been very, very hard. They started puberty really, really young, about at 10 years old, when they were throwing a fit over not getting the right kind of cereal, because it's the little things that end up being big explosions. Right. I was like, that's it. And we got them in for another psychological evaluation. I had a really hard time finding somebody to do a psychological evaluation on my child, because of how really not great the children mental health field is right now. My insurance wouldn't cover it. I had to pay $3,000 out of pocket. Wow. And we got the diagnosis of autism then. And we started, we got them a therapist. And so they started with a therapist. And having that diagnosis was a kind of like, it was reassuring in a way. I was just like, I knew it. We just didn't like pinpoint it. And sometime with soon females, like born females, it doesn't, they don't display in ways that are necessarily typical. You know, I grew up in the 90s, and unless you were like nonverbal or a savant, they weren't throwing around that diagnosis. They didn't know a lot about it. And so because of that, I feel like there's just pockets of people that have gone through their life misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, or not diagnosed at all, feeling like, you know, going, I mean, it's a big problem. But we got that diagnosis, and at 10 is when they started talking about not feeling like they were a she, talking about feeling like they were a different gender identity. And so we focused on that too. Like, we live in, at first it's like, is this just a thing? Is this really just a thing? Like, is it a phase? But it didn't matter either way to us. Like, we want our kid to be happy and healthy, and I will call you whatever pronouns or whatever name you want me to. I am supporting you. We just want you to thrive. Right. And that's been consistent. You know, they are non-binary, so they are they, them, and they go by Clay. They were born with a different name. They go by Clay. And that has helped a lot of their mental health. But suicidal ideation and suicidal thoughts started to get bigger and bigger over the course of the past year. And I was desperately trying to find somebody to help us figure out what was going on and to bring medication into the equation. And I found that everywhere I went that took our insurance, psychiatrist to talk about meds, or either an inpatient or outpatient to get a better diagnosis to see what was going on, didn't take our insurance or had 6-month waiting lists. And I was at the point that everybody was just telling me to call 911 and take them to the emergency room for a psych hold. And I was just like, my 11-year-old, you want me to take my 11-year-old for a psych hold, or pay out of pocket or be on this long waiting list? And it got to the point that they started that we had to switch to get on Medicaid, get help. You know, because I wasn't willing to wait anymore. And my ex-husband is 100% disabled veteran. And so we used his income got them on Medicaid, and within 2 weeks they were on medication and
Wow.
actually getting weekly therapy.
Is that making a difference?
Yes. We got them on meds. In January, we noticed they started self-harming. So it was like, it takes a while to figure out the right kind of medication.
Right.
And so when we noticed the self-harm, we did put them in a stabilization unit for about 7 days. It's really hard as a parent when you go to providers trying to describe to them what's going on at home. You know, they only get to see like a window of what's going on. And when you have autistic kids, they, at least especially mine, I feel like one of the deterioration of their mental health was they were a professional masker. So they put on this mask, and masking is really unhealthy and it's exhausting. And so we put them in to the 7-day hold. It was really great because they had 24-hour care. They had lots and lots of therapy, and other people were able to see what was going on at home. And they added in some medication that has been really helpful. We doubled up on therapy. We doubled up on family therapy. And what we did on our home front is we stopped trying to control their behavior and instead try to control the triggers. And this has been absolutely groundbreaking for our house. And it was a shift in perspective for me. I was always just like, the behavior, they're being violent. They're threatening to do scary things. They're screaming at my 7-year-old. And then wanting to fix the behavior rather than just that little change in perspective. Like, no. Like, what are their triggers? And by doing that and them learning about their own triggers, they're able to self-advocate for themselves. They're able to be like, okay, like loud noises, can't do it. Their little brother, huge trigger because he's got a very loud, high-pitched 7-year-old neurotypical boy energy, you know, which is normal. Like, he's just, you know, bouncing off the walls and doing what kids do. It's really hard for them. And so me and my ex-husband, we did have 50-50 custody. So the kids would go with him half the week, with me half the week. And we switched it around so that my oldest Clay isn't around their brothers as much. They're only, rather than being with their brothers 100% of the time, they're only with their brothers 3 days a week. So they have more alone time with us. So they're not in their room as much. So they're out with us. So they're not having that crazy stimulation. We pulled them from school completely. You know, like, school was always really hard for them. They would do great at school. Like, they were an awesome student. The teachers had no idea what was going on, but they would come home and lose their mind. And it's, I heard somebody describe masking as like holding a can of soda and shaking it up all day long. All day long, you're just shaking that soda, and you come home and you open it and it freaking explodes, because it's like holding your breath all day long, not being able to just relax and be yourself. And that's what was happening. And when COVID hit and they got pulled from school, they got pulled from the 5th grade. So they didn't get to finish the 5th grade, didn't get to learn about going to the 6th grade middle school and having 6 teachers from 1. And that kind of shift for autistic kids is massive. Like, going from 6 teachers to teacher, having to go to different classes, like the routine, and switch schools. And so when it was time to start virtual learning, they have to be in person. They were off in La La Land, didn't take it seriously. And then when it was time to go back in person, their anxiety and social anxiety, and also for going for so long without having to mask, they couldn't. And that's when that schools opened up again and they were back in school, that it was a rapid slide into self-harm and us having to make really big decisions. So we pulled them from school completely. And so we've just been kind of unschooling. They have become an amazing baker. You know, we've been encouraging hobbies that they have, like drawing and reading, and just really focusing. Like, mental health is more important than education at times, because what we were doing to them was obviously putting them in a place that was scary. And so they're starting an official online school in August that we're already like kind of preparing for. And it's going to be more involved, where I'm doing more of the work, which I'm totally willing to do. But right now, they've had a couple instances of relapse into self-harm. Their bird died. And it's just, the more I learn about that, it's more of a release. But for the most part, the improvement we've noticed since we changed our perspective on controlling the behavior or preventing the triggers has been amazing. Our house is a calmer, safer place because we were spending the majority of the time walking on glass. It was traumatic. It's caused trauma for us all. And so now when they do get triggered and we see that explosive, violent, scary stuff come out, we're just like, ooh, because we were so conditioned before. It became our normal, which was really hard and scary. And so and also they're so much better advocating. They're like, Mom, it's getting a little too noisy. Mom, I need to go to my room. Something that I did looking back that I think was really harmful, especially for autistic kids, is when they would do something wrong, I would take away their electronics. I would take away their phone. And for autistic kids, like that is a way of self-regulation. And so I don't do that anymore. I have safe limits. It shuts off at 12:30. It turned back on at 7:30. But it's a tool for them to regulate. And so it's like, not necessarily more about, helping our children changing their behavior, of more than like giving them an environment they can thrive in and get that confidence and learn to advocate and learn, stims that help. My oldest is an auditory stimmer, and I didn't realize they were an auditory stimmer. I just thought that they were funny until the past year. And since they are 5 years old, you ask them a question, they'll respond with chicken nugget, or some like bizarre word and I was just like, you're funny. Or say hi to grandma and they'd say earwax, but they would get stuck on a certain word for months and months and months, and they'd fit it in. And whenever they get nervous, they will just repeat this word. We didn't realize until this past year that it's verbal stimming, and we encourage stimming in our house. Like, regulate yourself, do what you have to do to stay in a very awesome place where you can thrive.
How about you? Have you found out what you need to do for you to, because you sound very involved and very passionate. I love hearing how you are involved in your family's life. It's inspiring. But how do you take care of you throughout all this?
Oh my gosh, it's so important, isn't it? It's so important. And I learned this, the hard way, because I do, like, when I became a mom, I got super into everything baby. I started baby wearing and cloth diapering and, went to all of the groups. So then I became a doula and a monitress and started attending births. Like, I just embrace. That's my like ADHD. Like, you give me something I like and I learn everything about it. And then my ex-husband was in the Army. So I was running the ship solo. Like, he was deployed in Afghanistan, and I, was at home by myself in North Carolina with not a lot of help and not a lot of breaks. And I mean, if you are trying to help kids prevent overstimulation and burnout, you yourself cannot have to try to prevent overstimulation and burnout. And taking breaks and having self-care, whether it be little, whether it be big, just anything that you have that's for you, that's not necessarily kid related, you know what I mean, is so important, that you have to keep your own mental health in check as well. Luckily I'm divorced, but because me and my ex-husband, I know it's a secret amongst divorced parents, is we get breaks. We co-parent like bosses. Like, our marriage didn't work out, but we continue to raise our kids together. And my partner, Michael, who lives with me. So I have a solid group of people behind my back. And so we get breaks from the kids. It used to be 3 days a week. We had breaks from the kids, and now it's only about 2 days because we switched the schedule around. So Clay isn't with their younger brothers as much to help them. But really, just for me, is finding stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the kids. Finding stuff that is nurturing myself as a woman and myself as a mother. And that can be really hard depending on the kind of support you have and the kind of needs your child has. I know with, I have special needs moms that have kids with cerebral palsy, that have terminal children. Like, the constant needs that your children require obviously is going to look different for everybody. But what isn't different is your need for respite, your need to, I started therapy. I had to, like, living and it's so funny. It's something that I've been really focusing on the past year. It's like I grew up in a household where I was walking on glass with very angry, violent, scary people. And then so to all of a sudden have my child be putting off that same energy, even though they're a child, that was my reaction, was like back to, it'd be really traumatic. And so me, myself, having a therapist and having, taking breaks and taking that vacation, or just taking that bubble bath, or taking that nap, but finding what fills your cup and filling it. Because if you're running on empty and you're just pouring onto your children, you get to a point where you hit a wall, and the quality of the parenting that goes down, the quality of your life goes down, and you end up resenting your kids or your life or your situation. And then nobody thrives if mama ain't happy. You know what I mean? And so just finding people, a community, other people that maybe have children with the same disorders or disabilities as yours are, just having that support is what I've had to do.
Yeah, you covered so much there. Like, I love how you talked about taking responsibility for, how things would roll in your house. And, I think we don't like to talk about it so much, but a lot of times, I found myself even in the past wanting to try and change something within one of my kids so that things could get better. And
Right.
that is like the exact opposite of what needed to be done in that situation.
Right.
So it's taking responsibility to come up. I love how you, with the triggers and finding different ways so that your kids can thrive, and then also taking responsibility and caring for yourself and caring for myself. I mean, those two things are game changers.
Right.
If someone's out there trying to get their kid to change and isn't taking care of themselves, I would venture to say that they're struggling pretty hardcore in their life right now and in their, kind of mental health,
Right.
versus the opposite. And then, I see a lot of positive passion that comes through you. And so I'm sure it's inspiring other people out there, not just me, but it is inspiring. So you should congratulate yourself for that.
Oh, thank you. It's much easier to change yourself and your perspective than it is to change other people, including your children, and there is such ableist views regarding being, atypical or disabilities and stuff. And we kind of grew up in this society that looked as if it isn't normal, it's wrong, and a lot of our expectations, speaking
Right.
for myself, before I had kids, of what my family would look like was very ableist. Like, they're going to be healthy and they're going to be like me and they're going to do, what I mean? Which is ridiculous because every person is different. And really kind of confronting those deep-seated, like, ableist, like, no, I want my child to be this way. You know what I mean? Or still trying to make my child appear neurotypical or be neurotypical. You know what I mean? Rather than embracing how colorful and amazing their mind is, and not being ashamed of your stimming, and advocating for yourself, and knowing your triggers, and owning, I want my children to thrive and to be confident in who they are, not be ashamed, not be something that they have to hide. And I don't really want to raise my children to conform to make society comfortable either. I want them to change the world because it needs to be changed. And so that started in our home with me confronting those old ideas of what healthy and normal are supposed to look like, which is ridiculous when you really think about it. For us, healthy and normal is everybody thriving in their own way and trying to keep as harmonious, happy of an environment as possible. And with 3 different kids, with 3 different, it can be difficult. But what happened when I did change that perspective, and we just started focusing and like owning the triggers, like, it's cool that being touched on your arm makes you feel weird. We just won't do that. You know what I mean? Like, their confidence increased, and when their confidence increased, their happiness increased. And then the house got safer, and then everybody was happier. The second that click, I just had to change that perspective in myself.
Have you ever gotten any pressure from outside people to, like, put so and so in a home, or kind of split things up at all?
No, I feel like there was that pressure to get my son in and get him diagnosed, and what's wrong with his speech and why is he talking that way, and you need to do something about that. But ultimately it was when he started first grade and it was affecting his education that we were just like, okay, now it's time, but with my oldest, and here's the thing is, the judgment and the shaming that comes from other people, just being a parent, period, is pretty gnarly. I was very much involved in mom groups and support groups, and the mom shaming is just horrific. But that extends to just human beings, and and when you have a 3-year-old at the grocery store and all of a sudden they have an epic freak out and are screaming and crying, and you have people judging you and thinking, well, if this was my kid, this is what I would do. And they're watching you, and then you start to panic, and we all question if we're doing the right thing and if we're raising our kids right. Like that's a lot, man. That's really hard. And so I will take advice. Sometimes I get awesome advice. Sometimes I get handed amazing resources, and sometimes it's people looking in thinking they know how to fix my family or that my family needs to be fixed. And then you just kind of let that slide on, too. I feel like I don't know, the judgment or the urgency or the advice from other people was regarding definitely my oldest, because, they were able to mask when we had company over, but my mom lived with me for a short period of time, and they would have this epic, scary freak out and say, I wish you were dead, like horrible, horrible things come out of my child's mouth. And then the eyes turn to me like, how could you let your child behave this way?
Right.
Or, even in my mind, with their, when they started, experimenting with their gender identity, and I, asked my friends and family to use different pronouns and change their name, I've even felt some judgment from that. Like, I can't believe you're allowing your child to do this. Or me just deep dark in my head thinking that because I do have a child that has suicidal ideation and, can get so violent and self-harms at 12, that people are going to think it was because of my parenting, that I wasn't doing a good enough job, or maybe I gave them too much. There's like so much judgment that can happen. And ultimately, we all make mistakes, but this is my family, and I know my children, and I know what they need, and I supply them with those needs. And I don't really keep the company of people that I feel that energy from.
Yeah, I think that's smart. And the reason I asked that question was because I received a lot of pressure, and still do to a point, having 7 kids within 6 years of age. A lot of people, all the way to my close family, feel like it would, allow the typical kids to explore and have more if, so-and-so wasn't here, right? Like,
if you pick up your time, right?
You have the constraints. So have you ever thought about placing, and I've gotten a lot of pressure. So I was curious if, and I don't judge anybody who does choose
Right.
to put their kid wherever they feel their kid is best suited.
Right.
By all means, go for it. So
right.
Anyway, that's why I asked. How about any aha moments along the way that you kind of shared a lot of them. So any aha moments you want to share with Naked Parent Nation?
In the past year, with the deterioration of the mental health of my oldest, of course, I'm in lots of autistic parent groups and whatever. But something that's been really amazing for me and my perspective and just my knowledge of a neurotypical world and autistic people is joining groups that are run by autistic adults and listening to them. Is to, really, and they're amazing, and really they are working really, really hard to advocate for autistic youth. And just listening, listening to their perspective. And, a lot of times in these special needs or autistic groups, and I found this before I even started like listening to autistic voices or being aware that there was that resource out there, that parents with children with special needs or with disabilities or with autism, they almost become that, like that becomes a part of their identity. I'm an autistic mom, with the bumper stickers and the things and that, like they very much, that becomes them. And that actually does a lot of harm to their kid, and that's always kind of something that bothered me. And I actually seen that with the chronic illness groups that I'm in, for my Chiari malformation and my disabilities, is that people become their illness and become their, like, that's their identity. And it never sat right with me. And listening to autistic adults, talking about, autistic children and what the stims really are and the best way to approach this, and to not try to train our children to be neurotypical. And it was so many aha moments just by shutting my mouth and listening. I'm like, that makes so much sense. In a lot of ways, it was actually really validating, because I have always tried to parent, not trying to fit my children into a round hole. Do you know what I mean? Like I have always tried to, parent my children based on my children's needs, and not necessarily my ideal behavior and ideal world of what I think my children are, supposed to be. But for as far as autism and, triggers and that, like really just listening to these autistic adults has changed quite a lot in my house of my understanding of, of autism. And I'm very grateful for them. They work really hard to advocate for our kids. And sometimes we just need to take a back seat and listen, Well,
that's super cool. That's super cool. And I think the quote that you shared, which I totally agree with, is whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. Is that your quote that you shared?
That is my quote. Henry Ford. It's one of my favorites.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's the quote. That was the quote that you decided to share. And I think that goes so well with what you just were talking about these, these autistic mom or whatever, all of a sudden, whatever you see, whatever you believe, you are. So, and then that creates these identities for people that are based on what,
Right. Because each person and each person with special needs, or each person with disability, or each person who is, not neurotypical, they're still people. They are not like, my oldest is not autism. My middle child is not Chiari. I am not my disability. I am somebody else who, and it's a part of, who I am, but it's not, it isn't necessarily my identity. We're so much more than that. We're just humans that maybe operate a little bit differently, or humans that have different needs to, get by. And, but we're all individuals,
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not proud of it, but I've said I hate you and wish you were dead to the people I love the most, when I was a little kid. I mean, that's not, I mean, so.
Right. How hard to be labeled based on your worst behavior and your worst moments,
Right.
Like that's not okay either. So, yeah.
How about some quick one answer or one sentence responses to a few questions to give the listeners out there some quick responses? You down for it?
Sure, let's go.
All right. What's the best advice you've received?
To trust my gut.
Share a personal habit that contributes to your success.
Oh my goodness. A personal habit that contributes to my success is probably my determination.
I feel the determination.
Yeah.
Do you have a top resource recommendation to share with other parents?
I'm just going to go back to the group that I found that has been so great. It's a Facebook group. It's called Autism Inclusivity, and it's run by autistic adults, and it's been really helpful specifically for autism. for my
I
autistic
love
kids.
that one. I love that
Yeah.
one. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah.
What's the next thing on your list that you want to add for your own individual well-being?
Gosh, I think just like continuing to help my children thrive and continuing to do things that are nurturing to me. I think I told you that my partner runs a nonprofit. It's called Heartcrate. You can check out more information at heartcrate.org. But essentially, what we do is when kids are pulled from their home and taken into foster care, they leave everything behind. So all of their identity, their individuality, all of their favorite toys and books and genres. And you know how kids find that one thing and that becomes, like my son, it was Thomas the Train, and then it was like obsessed with Mario. They have to leave all that behind. And generally they're given like plushies and a blanket and a journal or a coloring book, like really generic things, but atop of the trauma that they are coming from, but also the trauma of having to leave their home and placed. And so what we do is we give a survey to their new foster parents, their new caregivers, to fill out with the child, asking questions about the kid. Like, what is your favorite video game? What are your interests? Do you like this and that? And then from there, we build a custom Heartcrate box filled with all of their favorite things, and also maybe some things they haven't thought of that kind of go along with their favorite things. Like if they love, we're big geeks in my house. So, do they love make believe? Well, here's a beginner's guide to role playing games and Dungeons and Dragons.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been really awesome. And we've been around for about 2 years. We're currently seeking out corporate sponsorship. Our goal is to bring this nationwide. Our goal right now is to get every kid pulled from their home in Colorado a Heartcrate. So that's a lot of really awesome stuff that we're doing at home that sometimes is, I don't want to say a distraction from maybe the hardships of raising special needs kids, but it's important that you have lots of stuff that's just not 100% all about your kids. Like that's how you're going to grow as a person too. And if it's other things to help other kids, then that's amazing also. But just going back to self-care, it's really important that you are continuing to grow as a human being, and then you will grow as a woman or a father, and also as a mother, and then everybody is happier. And a lot of times maybe it takes doing something different that doesn't have to do with your kids.
That sounds so cool. And we have to tell you, the things that people I've interviewed on this show are doing behind the scenes are so cool. Like everybody's there's a lot of people that are taking their little angle at supporting the new world that we're building, because that's what it is. It's a new world. It's not about special needs and typical. It's just evolving as the world evolves, in my opinion. So
yeah.
And it's really amazing. And what's the name? Can you give us the URL again so we can check it out? Or
It's Heartcrate, and we're www.heartcrate.org is our website, and we're really awesome. So, check it out. Like I said, we're completely crowdfunded right now. We are talking to a couple of streamers and corporations and actively seeking out grants. So we kind of had to take a break during COVID just because everything was crazy. But the past couple months, my partner has been full steam ahead, and we're really hoping in the next 2 years we can bring it to cities near you to hopefully help foster kids or kids pulled from their home find their new identity and let them know that there is people out there that love them.
Awesome. I'll make sure to get that in the show notes so that if there's a corporate sponsor out there listening and you want to be a part of this awesome venture, you'll know where to reach out.
Yep, support kids there. That's what we say. Because the thing is my sponsor, my partner is a social worker, and so he was working in a residential treatment facility for children with mental illness, and a lot of the times they were children who couldn't be put into foster care because of their mental state. Wow. They were very high needs kids, and he was noticing a lot of them didn't have this, like they either lost that identity or they didn't have it to begin with. So he started out teaching these kids how to play Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons, and getting them interested in all this kind of geeky culture stuff that's really fulfilling, and it's really awesome. And that's when they saw these kids left with nothing, who they missed their, you know, their plushie that they got left behind, and they're given something else, or they go into a home and they are expected to adapt to this new family's identity. And a lot of times they do. And that individuality gets taken away. And so we're just trying to fill this hole that we think is really important.
That's very cool. And
Thanks.
I really appreciate the time you have. Do you have any final guidance or advice you'd like to leave with Naked Parent Nation?
You know, I feel like getting old ideas, constantly growing in your perspective, is so important. Being adaptable. You know, I used to tell my clients in birth that the only thing predictable about birth is that it's unpredictable. And the only thing predictable about parenthood is that it's unpredictable. And our job as parents is not to create these perfect humans. It's to let these like imperfect, amazing humans live their best life. That's our job. And whatever, it might not look like what you thought it would. It might not look like your neighbor Joe thinks it should like, but if everybody is thriving and living the best life they can, then you know you're doing your job.
Breanne, you are an inspiration to me. It was an inspiring conversation today. And I hope we get to maybe do this again down the road. And
yes, absolutely. Thank you
in.
so much for what you're doing. It's really important. It's so reassuring to parents to hear bits of people's stories that they identify with, and then to hear how other people are thriving and be able to take bits and pieces and apply it, or maybe hear an aha moment like I did that just has changed everything in my house.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. So thank you so much for being with us. We wish
Thank
you all
you
the
so
best
much,
and
Chad.
great success. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you.